Hi. We've both made mistakes, she said. But can't we choose each other again? I studied her across the table. It was the sixth time I'd heard some version of that line. 6. New chances. Spaced over nearly 2 years. The first time, I'd clung to it. The second, still wanted to believe. The third and fourth I'd rationalized. By the fifth, the words had started to feel rehearsed. Now, on the sixth, they sounded memorized. Empty syllables shaped by muscle memory. I didn't answer right away. Just nodded faintly and looked down at my plate. A moment later, we moved on to neutral topics. A client pitch she was preparing, my firm's new project timeline. We navigated the meal like colleagues staging a cordial lunch, not spouses trying to mend a life together. Later that night, after we returned home, I noticed her conference totes slung over the side of the living room chair. She was upstairs by then, catching up on emails. In the guest room, a boundary sheet insisted on this time around. Space to rebuild trust. I told myself I wasn't snooping, just clearing the clutter. But when I lifted the bag, a slip of stiff paper slid from one of the outer pockets, a valet stub. I picked it up, frowning. Marston and Finch. I knew the name. A private downtown club, old money, corporate elite. We'd been invited there once, years ago, for a client gala. Membership required more than cash. You needed pedigree, sponsorship, the right circles. I turned the stub over. Date stamped on the back. Last Saturday night. Last Saturday, she told me she was at a university event. Guest panelist for a Women in Leadership discussion. When I'd asked if I could attend, she'd smiled, warm, apologetic, and said it was a closed workshop, invite only for the academic cohort. She'd stayed overnight on campus, or so she'd claimed. I stared at the valet stub. No university panel was hosted at Marston and Finch. That wasn't oversight, that was a lie. For several minutes, I stood frozen, valet stub between my fingers. My mind ping-ponged between excuses and implications. Maybe there was an innocent reason. Maybe she'd met someone for coffee afterward. Maybe the event had changed venues. I sat down at my laptop. 10 minutes of searching told me what I needed to know. The university's business school calendar showed no leadership panel scheduled that weekend. In fact, the event had been postponed a month ago due to scheduling conflicts. Their website confirmed it. I leaned back in my chair. The valet stub sat on the desk, damning and small. And just like that, something shifted in me. The reflex to believe, to give her yet another benefit of the doubt, cracked. This wasn't a first offense. This wasn't a simple oversight. This was 6 new chances, deep, and I just stumbled across a deliberate lie crafted to cover a Saturday night spent somewhere I wasn't meant to know about. I glanced toward the stairs. The guest room door was closed. A faint light leaked beneath it. My phone buzzed with an email alert, but I ignored it. I wanted to believe her. Still, some irrational part of me wanted there to be an explanation. But another part, the part that had quietly logged every inconsistency over the past year, finally surfaced. Enough. I wasn't going to confront her yet. That had never worked. Not after the first time, not after the fifth. Every confrontation ended in tears, gaslighting, promises, circular talks that drained me more than they clarified anything. No. This time, I would do it differently. I would treat this like what it was, a problem requiring strategy, not emotion. I slipped the valet stub into a folder in my desk drawer. One chance remained, not for her, but for me. One last chance to face what I already suspected. Tomorrow, the investigation would begin. By morning, the valet stub sat squarely in my mind, a jagged stone in an otherwise orderly path. The day unfolded in its usual patterns, conference calls, emails, project check-ins, but beneath it all, something had shifted. I watched more closely, noticed more. When she came down late, dressed for work, a new scent followed her into the kitchen. Bold, expensive, not the light florals she usually wore. She moved around the room easily, filling her thermos with coffee, answering a text on her phone. She smiled at me, casual, untroubled, as if the conversation at dinner, the so-called new beginning, had never been in question. I caught sight of the scarf looped casually over her handbag. Deep burgundy, silk, unfamiliar. I'd never seen her wear it. I would have remembered. She'd once told me she rarely wore scarves, didn't like how they felt too formal. But now it hung there, paired with the sharp, unfamiliar fragrance. New scarf? I asked lightly. She glanced down and shrugged. Oh, just something I pulled from the closet. Her tone was smooth, practiced. When she left, I watched from the window as her car pulled out of the drive. After her taillights vanished, I stood there a moment longer, thinking. I hadn't planned what happened next. I told myself it was curiosity, not suspicion, but that wasn't true. In the garage, I opened her car door, slid into the driver's seat, checked the odometer. The number jumped out at me. Much higher than her normal weekly mileage. She worked downtown. I knew the route, knew the detours, the occasional meetings at nearby firms. But this suggested multiple long trips in the past few days alone. A slow breath. Then I backed away and closed the door carefully, leaving no trace. Later that evening, she suggested we order in Indian food, one of our old comfort rituals. I agreed. Watched her plate the dishes, pour wine, chat about trivial things. The surface normalcy was almost chilling. After dinner, she left her handbag on the counter while answering a call upstairs. I moved to the bag, checked her wallet, her receipts. One stood out immediately, a dinner receipt from Maison du Verre, a high-end French place we'd gone to once, years ago. Pricey. Reservation only. The date, 2 nights ago. She told me she was working late that night, catching up on a backlog of client reports. I flipped the receipt over. Dinner for 2. Wine pairings. No mention of a group or a business function. I slid it back carefully and stepped away. The picture was building, line by line. The valet stub. The new perfume. The scarf. The mileage. The mismatched stories. The dinner for 2. Individually, they might be explained away. Together, they were a ledger, and it was growing. By midnight, I sat in my study, door closed. My mind kept circling the same question: how much more did I need to know? But deep down, I already had my answer. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. Not yet. Confrontations had always been her battleground, where she cried, spun stories, turned the tables until I walked away unsure of what was true anymore. No. This time, I would gather facts, not feelings. I would give myself one final chance, to confirm what instinct already screamed. Once I had proof beyond spin, I would act. Quietly. Strategically. I opened a fresh notebook. First page, valet stub. Marston and Finch. Saturday. False university event. Second line, perfume. New, not worn before. Third scarf. Unfamiliar. Fourth, odometer check. Excess mileage. Fifth, Maison du Verre dinner receipt. 2 guests, during claimed work night. I closed the notebook and exhaled. This was no longer about saving the marriage. This was about saving myself, from another round of lies, from a 7th chance. I knew better than to take. Tomorrow, I would begin looking outward, and others would start filling in the missing pieces. The first rule, stay calm. The second, stay invisible. I wasn't going to confront her with half a picture. Not this time. I'd done that before, raised questions too soon, tipped my hand, only to watch her slip through on technicalities and twisted narratives. No. I would move methodically, build the ledger until it was unassailable. The next afternoon, opportunity came by chance. I took a late meeting near the wine bar we used to frequent, Summit, a place we'd loved once, before things turned brittle between us. I hadn't been there in over a year. After the meeting, impulse took over. I stopped in, not for nostalgia, but for information. The sommelier, Daniel, recognized me immediately. Warm greeting, handshake. No sign he suspected anything off. We caught up briefly. Business talk, casual banter. Then, over a second glass of Pinot, I eased into the real reason I'd come. She mentioned you've had a lot of industry dinners here lately, I said, light as if in passing. I've been meaning to stop in with her. Daniel gave an easy nod. Oh yes, she's been by a few times. Some great private events, closed tastings, new importer showcases. He leaned in slightly. Actually, there was a really good one just last month. She brought a guest, one of those business coaching types, I think. My pulse ticked faster, but I kept my face neutral. Probably her coach. She's working on some new projects. Daniel smiled, none the wiser. Yeah, that's the vibe I got. I left soon after, mind racing. So, private tastings, not publicized, guest appearances. The coach. I knew exactly who he meant. Graham. Longtime family friend. Mentor. Occasional consultant for her firm. He'd called me, brother, at our anniversary party 2 years ago. I drove home slowly, thinking. Once back in my study, I added to the notebook, Summit Wine Bar, private tastings, attended with coach. That night, another piece dropped. A mutual friend, Mark, called to discuss a vendor referral. Casual, nothing unusual. Toward the end of the call, Mark hesitated. By the way, he said, voice shifting, I wasn't sure if I should mention this, but have you two been out to any of those new tasting events downtown? Not lately. Why? A pause. Just, I ran into some folks who saw her at a closed event a couple weeks back, with a +1. Didn't look like a work thing. I let the silence stretch, then chuckled lightly. She's been busy with her coaching network, probably one of those. Mark sounded uncertain. Maybe. Just seemed close. I thanked him and ended the call. Another entry in the ledger. Closed tasting event, +1, not husband, noted by mutual contacts. The image was sharpening. Then came the next clue, less accidental, more damning. Cleaning the kitchen a few days later, I moved a drawer organizer to white beneath. Something wedged behind the cutlery caught my eye. A small luxury pen box. Montclair, an elite brand. Odd. I opened it. Inside, a sleek pen engraved, but not with my name. Not a gift from me. The inscription read, For every future chapter, G. I closed the box carefully, breath tight. It hadn't been presented. It wasn't on display. It was hidden. Another note for the ledger. Montclair pen, gift from G, concealed. By that evening, my doubt was gone. This was no misunderstanding, no reparable rift. She was leading a double life, and preparing to cross the threshold fully. I felt it in every detail, the growing secrecy, the staged moments of normalcy, the careful omissions, and through it all a darker undercurrent, that somewhere, beneath her repeated assurances of new chances, she was building an escape. I glanced at the notebook. The list was no longer speculative. It was evidence, a pattern. But something told me this wasn't the whole of it. She wasn't just drifting towards someone else, she was plotting an exit. And if that was true, there would be signs. In business. In money. In reputation. Tomorrow, I would widen the net. I kept my movements deliberate in the days that followed. No confrontations. No shifts in tone. I played the part. Attentive, cooperative, unchanged. But beneath the surface, my strategy widened. I began tracing connections. Not just her movements, but her circle. It started with a pattern of absences. New client strategy sessions. Suddenly held off-site. Frequent after-hours calls, voice low, door closed. Calendar entries blocked as personal development. But the turning point came through someone I didn't expect. Jenna had been one of our closest mutual friends, part of the original circle that had celebrated our engagement, attended our wedding, hosted countless dinners over the years. We'd drifted somewhat in recent months, the natural side effect of tension in the marriage. Still, when I ran into her by chance at a professional mixer, the conversation flowed easily. Toward the end of the night, as we stood near the exit, Jenna hesitated. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. I nodded. Of course. She looked down, then back up, conflicted. I assumed you knew, she said finally. About her and Graham. I held her gaze steady. What about them? Jenna winced. That it's not just business. It hasn't been, for a while. I said nothing. Let the silence speak. She sighed. It's been going on for months, honestly. Some of us thought, maybe you two had an arrangement, or you knew, or... Her voice trailed off. I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. The words landed like ice. Some of us thought you knew. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was social. While I'd been grasping at scraps of trust, the outer circle had already accepted a different reality. Quietly, without me. I thanked her calmly, ended the conversation on polite terms. Once home, I sat in the study, staring at the ledger. The list felt heavier now, no longer just evidence of her lies, but evidence of my isolation. I added another line. Confirmation from mutual friend, affair with Graham known in social circle. Duration months. I looked at the page, hands steady. There was no going back now. No scenario where this was salvaged through another round of promises or performative reconciliation. And still, something deeper gnawed at me, a sense that the betrayal wasn't limited to the personal. Too many professional details had shifted lately. Odd gaps in our shared LLC records, increased interest in personal branding. Conversations she steered away from when I raised them. This wasn't just an affair. It was an exit strategy. And if that was true, if she was planning to leave not as a wounded spouse, but as a rebranded, independent visionary, then I needed to know exactly how far it had gone. I made a decision. The next morning, I contacted our shared accountant under the pretext of prepping for our upcoming quarterly review. If she was staging her next move, money would tell the story. The accountant's office sat 2 blocks from my firm, familiar, neutral ground. I scheduled the meeting under routine pretense. Quarterly prep, just want to get ahead of things, I'd said. Diane, our longtime CPA, greeted me warmly. No suspicion. We'd worked with her for years. For the first half hour, we reviewed the usual, joint LLC performance, upcoming tax planning, standard projections. Then, casually, I steered the conversation. Has she mentioned any changes on her side? I asked. She's been vague about her plans lately. Diane hesitated, a flicker of something in her eyes. Well, I assumed she'd spoken to you, she said slowly. She's been asking quite a bit about setting up a separate consultancy, new entity, different structure. Wanted to know about protecting it from any joint obligations. The words landed sharp, but I kept my tone neutral as I met Diane's gaze. She mentioned that? Diane gave a small nod, folding her hands atop the ledger. Several times, she said. She told me she was looking at options for personal branding, too, possibly bringing in outside PR. Outside PR. I caught the significance immediately. This wasn't casual. It was a campaign. Leaning back slightly, I let the pause settle before asking, voice even. Has she filed anything yet? A flicker of hesitation crossed Diane's face. Not yet, she replied. She's still exploring options. But she seemed serious. I offered a polite smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate the update. With that, I wrapped the meeting smoothly, exchanging a few final pleasantries before stepping out into the cool air. My pulse remained steady, outwardly at least. Outside, the weight of it hit. She wasn't just drifting toward another relationship. She was staging a full exit, professionally, financially, reputationally. And the so-called sixth, new chance? Nothing more than a stalling tactic, giving her time to finish building her off-ramp. By the time I reached my office, the strategy was clear. I couldn't wait for her to make the next move. If I did, I'd be reacting to a separation she'd already scripted, spun to cast herself as the empowered architect of her own new life. No, I would exit first. On my terms, I began working quietly, secured consultations with my own financial counsel, moved key client relationships into my personal portfolio, well within the LLC's provisions, but something she hadn't been tracking closely. I also started documenting the valet stub, the wine bar receipt, the Montclair pen, Jenna's confirmation, and now, Diane's disclosure about the consultancy and PR prep. Each piece told the same story. The sixth chance was a smokescreen. One more piece arrived days later, almost by accident. An industry contact forwarded me a media inquiry template circulating among local PR firms. There, in a sample pitch draft, was her name, positioned as a thought leader preparing to launch a bold new consultancy after amicable transition from her prior venture. Amicable transition. The phrase chilled me. She was already crafting the narrative. The marriage would dissolve, gracefully, on her terms, with her positioned as visionary survivor, not betrayer. And behind the scenes, the private dinners, the hidden gifts. The brother, who wasn't? I sat in my study that night, staring at the compiled evidence. No anger, not anymore. Just a cold, clear resolve. The time for hoping was over. The ledger was complete. I would set the meeting. And this time, the door would close, for good. The night before, I barely slept. Not from nerves, not anymore. The outcome was inevitable. But beneath the calm, there was still weight. This was the hardest conversation I would ever have. The end of what we had built, of what I had once believed unshakable. I spent hours at my desk, reviewing the ledger again. Every line, every piece. I wanted no doubt, no loose end she could twist. At midnight I typed the final line for the envelope. Not every door reopens. I printed it, placed it beneath the documents, sealed the envelope with deliberate care. Then I sat in the darkened study, letting the silence settle. I didn't hate her. Strangely, that would have been easier. What I felt was something colder. The grief of understanding that the person across the table tomorrow would no longer be the woman I had once known. When dawn broke, I dressed carefully. Neutral tones. No business armor. No signs of battle. Ever's coffee hadn't changed. Same brick walls, same worn wood floors. The early hour meant fewer patrons, students buried in laptops, a few retirees chatting softly. No risk of dramatics here. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wanted time to watch the space breathe, to settle the storm inside. I chose a table by the window. Sunlight slanted across the surface, catching the envelope I placed in the center. Memory flickered. I'd proposed to her just blocks from here. After one of those Sunday mornings where we talked about dreams, futures, family. Back then, this cafe had felt like the heart of our shared world. Now it was a surgical theater. At 8 o'clock, she walked in, perfectly put together. The sharp fragrance drifted ahead of her. Burgundy scarf, the one from that first ledger entry, looped around her neck. She spotted me, smiled. That polished, public smile I'd come to recognize. "Morning," she said lightly, sliding into the chair across from me. "I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's time to look forward." Her tone held ownership, as if she still directed the script. I greeted her evenly. No warmth, no venom. Just clear. She ordered coffee. When it arrived, she wrapped her hands around the cup poised. I reached for the envelope, set it gently between us, tapped it once. "You'll want to read this," I said. My voice was steady, not cold, controlled. She blinked, a fractional hesitation, then opened it. The valet stub came first. Her breath caught, just a shade too audible. Then the maison du ver receipt. A faint flush rose in her neck. Next, Diane's notes on the separate consultancy. Now her hands stilled. Finally, the PR pitch draft, the carefully crafted, amicable transition narrative. When she looked up, her mask was already cracking. Her voice wavered. "You don't understand." I said nothing. Let the weight of the silence speak. She shifted tactics, voice softening. "I was going to tell you. We were making progress. I didn't want to disrupt." I met her gaze, calm. "You already have." A beat. The familiar cycle began. Eyes misting. A hand lifted, palm up, pleading. "It wasn't what you think. It was complicated. I was confused. We've both made mistakes." The words slid past me. Rehearsed. Reflexive. But beneath the practiced performance, her eyes flicked, calculating. She realized this was different, that I wasn't taking the bait. I let her finish. Then, deliberately, I folded the envelope closed. 6 was generous, I said softly. 1 was enough. She blinked fast, lips parting. "But can't we?" I rose, smoothing my jacket. Picked up my coffee, drank the last sip slowly, then set the cup down with deliberate care. I looked her in the eye, voice quiet, final. "Some doors don't just close," I said. "They lock." From my side. I turned, walked out without looking back. On the street, the morning air was sharp. My steps felt heavier than expected. Victory? No. It wasn't triumph. It was survival. The hardest chapter was still to come. In the weeks that followed, the public mask held, at first. She moved as though the transition was already underway. Carefully worded emails to our mutual contacts. Polite, professional phrasing. As we move into the next phase of our personal and professional lives, to the outside world, she was shaping her narrative. The empowered architect. The visionary stepping forward. Her PR firm's fingerprints were clear in every line. But reality had other plans. The first crack came from an unlikely source, one of Graham's industry contacts. A former client of mine forwarded a snippet from an internal bulletin. Graham had resigned. The memo was dry and corporate, but the subtext was clear. Compliance concerns. His firm had discovered conflicts, undisclosed relationships, entanglements jeopardizing key accounts. The timing was no coincidence. 2 days later, word reached me through a separate channel. Graham had ended it. Quietly. No grand declarations. He was protecting his own interests now. I filed the news away, emotionless. But the ripples had begun. Without Graham's backing, and without his insider access, her staged consultancy launch faltered. The PR firm scrambled to adapt. Their initial pitches fell flat. Sponsors grew hesitant. Then came the deeper blow. A key client association, one where she'd long held influence, launched an internal review. Too many whispers. Too many fractures in the polished story she tried to sell. When the association issued a suspension pending review, the news spread quickly through the professional circles that mattered. The narrative she'd crafted, of personal reinvention, collapsed under the weight of its omissions. In parallel, I moved with precision. The dissolution of our joint LLC was swift. My legal team ensured full compliance, but also protected my key relationships. Where loyalty mattered, it had already shifted. I retained the core clients, the ones who knew me, trusted me, respected the work itself. Her remaining contracts dwindled. The industry was small. Reputation traveled faster than PR spin. Finally, when the legal formalities were complete, I arranged for her share of the files to be couriered, boxed, labeled, final. On top, a single document. My official removal of her name from all joint branding. No message. No commentary. Just the facts. A receipt of transfer. A door closed. Weeks later, I passed her on the street by chance, an unplanned crossing in the financial district. She saw me, hesitated. The same burgundy scarf looped around her neck, as if clinging to a fragment of an earlier chapter. For a flicker of a moment, something flashed in her eyes. Regret? Anger? A longing for the narrative she could no longer control? I didn't stop, didn't acknowledge, didn't need to. Some doors lock, from my side. Months have passed now. The silence feels clean. The ledger closed. Thank you for watching. Bye.